Welcome in, everyone. Ready to dive into some Rob Burbea?
Yeah.
This is a fascinating collection of talks you've given us.
Yeah, it's really quite something.
We've got Buddhist thought and emptiness and soul making,
Mhm.
all mixed up with imaginal practices.
He really brings together so many different things.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. I'm already feeling my brain stretching in new directions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited about this one, though. For folks who might not be familiar with his work, can you give us a little intro to Rob Burbea? What made his teachings so unique?
Sure. So Rob Burbea was a Buddhist teacher, but he really pushed the boundaries of traditional Buddhist thought. He integrated Western psychology, especially depth psychology, and the work of James Hillman.
Ooh, yeah, Hellman.
And he was really drawn to this idea of soul making, this idea of actively cultivating a soul.
Okay, now that's what really caught my attention, the source material.
Yeah.
Because, it seems a little paradoxical, right? How can you cultivate a soul if there's no self?
Right.
It's like baking a cake without flour,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and it's something that Burbea really grapples with head on. He doesn't shy away from the tough questions. He sees this deep understanding of emptiness as essential, but he cautions against taking it as like a simple concept, like a glib thing, or the ultimate goal.
So it's not about achieving some kind of blank slate.
Right.
It's more like,
It-
what?
Yeah, he suggests that emptiness can be seen as this fertile ground from which a richer, more meaningful life can kind of sprout. So it's more like the foundation, not the finished product.
I love that. So how does soul making fit into all of this? What did Burbea mean by that term, especially in a Buddhist context?
Yeah, so for Burbea, soul making is about cultivating a vibrant, multifaceted sense of self. Not self in the egotistical sense, but more as a way of engaging with the world in a more conscious and soulful way. And he suggests that this unfolds through this kind of interplay between emptiness, our emotions, and what he calls the imaginal realm.
Okay, now hold on. Let's unpack that a bit for our listener. When you say imaginal, are we talking about like, daydreaming, fantasizing?
Not quite. The imaginal realm, as Burbea describes it, is a way of perceiving and interacting with reality through images, symbols, archetypes. But these aren't just fleeting thoughts. They hold deep meaning, and they can serve as guides for navigating life.
So it's like recognizing the symbolic language of our inner world
Exactly.
and how it connects to the outer world.
Yeah, it's like becoming fluent in the language of the soul, if you will.
I like that. Okay, so where do emotions fit into all of this? I'm sensing this isn't your typical calm and peaceful Buddhist approach.
You're right about that. Burbea actually kind of challenges that idea that the goal is to just pacify or transcend emotions altogether. He actually sees emotions as fuel for the whole process.
Really? So instead of trying to quiet the emotions, we should let them run wild.
I don't think he would say run wild, but he does encourage us to engage with them skillfully, to use them as raw material for transformation. He uses this analogy of a crucible where you use intense heat to purify and transform metals.
Ah,
So in the same way, he suggests we allow our emotions to heat up, ferment within us, and this gives rise to these potent images and insights.
so it's like emotions as alchemists. I'm intrigued. Can you say more about how this works in practice?
So it's not about just indulging in every emotion that comes up. It requires this balance, this awareness, acceptance, and also discernment. He really emphasizes creating this safe and spacious inner container where we can allow emotions to surface without judgment, without suppressing them.
So learning to be present with our emotions, to really listen to what they're trying to tell us.
Exactly. And as we get more comfortable with this, we start to notice how emotions often carry these seeds of images, metaphors, and symbols. Like they're speaking a language that goes beyond words.
So it's like a dance between the emotional and the imaginal, each feeding into the other. But it sounds like this could be kind of tricky territory too, right?
It does, and it definitely requires a certain level of skill and sensitivity. He's very clear that this isn't about getting swept away by every fleeting emotion or fantasy.
Right, discernment is key.
Yeah.
But how do we develop that discernment? How do we know if it's, a genuine message from the soul versus just some random noise from our conditioned mind?
Right, and that's where things get really interesting. Burbea suggests that this discerning awareness, it actually arises naturally as we deepen our understanding of emptiness and its implications for our sense of self.
So understanding emptiness isn't just an intellectual exercise.
No.
It actually helps us navigate our inner world more skillfully.
Exactly. As we start to see through this illusion of a fixed, independent self, we can loosen our grip on our thoughts, emotions, even our cherished beliefs. And this creates space for a more fluid, intuitive way of knowing to kind of emerge. And that knowing is grounded in wisdom and compassion rather than fear and attachment.
This is all starting to make sense, but, I have to admit, I'm still a little perplexed by this whole idea of soul making. How does Burbea define the soul?
That's a great question, and it's one that he approaches very carefully. I mean, he doesn't offer a rigid definition of the soul. He invites us to see it as this dynamic process of becoming, a journey of unfolding, of discovery.
Okay, so it's less about arriving at some fixed destination
Mhm.
and more about embracing the journey itself,
Yes. And he emphasizes that this journey is deeply personal, unique to each individual.
which, speaks to our listeners. They
Exactly.
love that idea of individual learning. So if there's no fixed definition of the soul, then how do we even begin to cultivate it?
Hmm.
What are some of the approaches or practices that he suggests?
Well, he draws from a really wide range of traditions and practices, from Buddhist meditation to imaginal practices, from depth psychology, and even diet work, which
Uh-huh.
involves working with a partner to explore these things in a relational context.
Diet work.
Mm.
Now I'm really curious to learn more about that.
Well,
How does working with a partner support soul making? How's it different from, say, traditional therapy?
yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we can definitely dive into a little bit later when we talk about the practical applications of Burbea's ideas.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready to
Okay,
keep going.
let's do it.
All right, so we've talked about soul making as this dynamic process, right?
Mhm.
Fueled by our emotions and guided by this, symbolic language of the imaginal. But how does this tie back into ethics? I remember you mentioning that Burbea saw a connection there between soul making and ethical living.
Yeah, it's a really interesting connection, and it challenges conventional notions of both, actually,
Oh.
of ethics and spirituality. So instead of viewing ethics as this separate set of rules or principles, like imposed from outside, Burbee suggests that ethical living actually arises naturally from the process of soul making itself.
So it's less about, following the commandments
Right.
and more about aligning our actions with our deepest yearnings.
Exactly. He draws on the work of philosopher Nikolai Hartmann, who explored this idea of values and virtues as a way to approach ethics that goes beyond, just simple rules or utilitarianism.
Right, so instead of rigid rules, it's more about cultivating virtues like compassion and wisdom and allowing for nuanced responses to different situations,
Mhm.
which, again, speaks to what we've been talking about with Burbea, this personal relationship with these concepts. But how do we know which virtues to cultivate? Are we talking about traditional Buddhist virtues, like, loving kindness and non-attachment, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, he doesn't limit himself to any specific set of virtues. He really encourages exploration, a wide range of ethical frameworks, and to discover, what resonates most deeply with our own unique soul.
So just like with emptiness and soul making, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to ethics other.
Right. It's about finding those threads that feel both familiar and exciting, like something you already know but haven't fully explored. He even uses this term radiant virtue to describe how certain souls might be drawn to expressing particular virtues in extraordinary ways, almost like their very being emanates a particular quality.
Radiant virtue. That's a beautiful concept. But can it also lead to, a sense of spiritual elitism? Like, oh, well, some people are just more virtuous than others.
Yeah, it's a valid concern, and it's something that Burbee acknowledges. But he emphasizes that the path of soul making is ultimately about cultivating humility, not superiority. It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, regardless of their, level of spiritual development.
So it's not about, judging ourselves or others based on some external standard.
Right.
It's more about fostering this deeper understanding of our own unique potential for goodness.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our deepest values, not to impress anyone or achieve some kind of moral high ground, but because it's the most authentic and fulfilling way to live.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But this brings up another question. How do we know if we're on the right track? How do we discern between the authentic soul desires that guide us toward this kind of ethical living and desires that might be driven by our ego or our conditioning?
Right. That's where discernment comes in again. It's so
Yeah.
important. Burbea really encourages us to pay attention to the fruits of our actions. Notice what brings us closer to a sense of freedom, wisdom, compassion, and what leads us down paths of confusion, suffering, or harm.
So it's not about blindly following our desires.
Right.
It's about developing this awareness that can help us distinguish between, what's really coming from our soul.
Yeah, exactly. And he offers this really helpful analogy. He suggests that our soul is like a garden, And our desires are like seeds. And some of these seeds are healthy. They'll produce these beautiful flowers and fruits. And others are weeds that'll just choke the life out of the garden. So it's up to us to cultivate the soil, to nurture those seeds that lead to flourishing and to weed out the ones that lead to suffering.
That's a powerful image. But how do we know which seeds are which? It seems like there's a lot of room for self-deception.
Oh, absolutely. It's a delicate process. It requires ongoing self-reflection and a willingness to be honest with ourselves. He really emphasizes mindfulness, both on and off the cushion,
Yeah.
as a way to develop greater clarity, insight into the nature of our desires.
Hmm.
He also suggests, working with a spiritual teacher or mentor who can offer guidance.
So this isn't something we can necessarily do entirely on our own.
Right.
We need support and guidance.
Yeah, he acknowledges that having that supportive community, that wise guidance can be invaluable, especially when you're navigating the complexities of your inner world.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The emptiness, the emotions, the imaginal, the ethics, even this importance of community and guidance is a very holistic approach to spiritual development that really encompasses both inner and outer transformation.
Yeah, and it really speaks to that desire that your listeners have for a personalized path.
Yeah.
Burbea really emphasizes that there's no one right way to do this work.
Right, he doesn't prescribe this one-size-fits-all path. He encourages exploration of different traditions and practices and frameworks to find what resonates. It's a process of experimentation and evaluation and adjustment. It's about honoring our own unique journey.
Absolutely. And what's so exciting about Burbea's teachings is that, he's not just presenting a set of ideas, he's inviting us to participate in an ongoing conversation, a process of discovery that's both personal and collective.
So it's not just about understanding soul-making, it's about actually doing soul-making. I'm curious, though, how can we apply these concepts more concretely? We talked earlier about diet practice as one approach that he recommends. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So diet practice is essentially a form of relational meditation
Yeah.
where two people work together to kind of explore these themes, the emptiness, soul making, the imaginal realm in a shared space of awareness and intimacy.
So it's like a laboratory for soul-making.
Exactly. It gives you this container for exploring these concepts, not just in our own minds, but in the dynamic interplay of relationship.
And how does that work in practice? What do people actually do in a diet?
So he suggests a variety of exercises and approaches, ranging from simple practices like the balance of attention, where partners just sit facing each other, and practice cultivating this balanced awareness of both their own internal experience and the subtle cues that are emanating from their partner.
So it's about attuning to our own inner world
Yeah.
and also the energy field of another person.
Exactly. And he suggests that as we get more skilled at this, we can begin to sense each other with soul, to perceive each other not just as physical bodies or personalities, but as expressions of a deeper, more essential nature.
Sensing with soul. That's a powerful idea. But it also sounds maybe a little intimidating. What if I'm not very good at, picking up on subtle energies?
Yeah.
Or sensing what's going on in another person's inner world?
Well, Burbea reassures us that this is a skill that can be cultivated through practice. It's not about having some kind of, special psychic ability. It's about developing a more refined awareness
Yeah.
of our own bodily sensations, emotions, and intuitive knowing. And as we cultivate this awareness in ourselves, it naturally extends outward to those around us.
So diet practice is a way of deepening our capacity for empathy and compassion, not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
Exactly. It's this practice of recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, of seeing ourselves reflected in the eyes of another. And he suggests that this kind of relational practice can be incredibly transformative, both for our individual soul-making journeys and for our collective capacity for love and understanding.
This is all so rich. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of what Burbea has to offer.
He have. And what's exciting is that he leaves us with so much to explore on our own. He's like this trailblazer, forging new paths and inviting us to follow.
So let's bring it home for our listeners.
Yeah.
We've talked about emptiness, right? As this fertile ground for soul-making. Emotions as fuel for the fire. The imaginal realm as this source of guidance. The link between ethics and soul-making. The importance of finding our own unique path. Diet practice as a way to explore all of this in relationship. And even this idea of sensing with soul. I don't know about you, but I feel like I need a nap.
Me too. It is a lot.
But in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. But I think it's important to remember that Burbea emphasizes, this personal relationship with these concepts. It's not about mastering a set of doctrines or achieving some predefined state of enlightenment. It's about discovering what these ideas mean for us in our own lives, right here, right now.
So let's leave our listener with a question to ponder. What aspects of this conversation resonate with them? What sparks their curiosity? What personal soul style are they drawn to cultivate?
And how might that shape their own unique path? What kind of world do they want to create within themselves and in the world around them?
That's a big question, isn't it? What kind of world do we want to create? It can feel um, pretty overwhelming at times,
Yeah.
especially with so much going on in the world, so much negativity.
It's true. It's easy to get discouraged,
Yeah.
to lose sight of the possibility of creating something better. But Burbea reminds us that soul making isn't just about this personal transformation. It's also about contributing to the healing and transformation of the world as a whole.
So our inner work ripples outwards.
Exactly. He suggests that as we cultivate more wisdom, more compassion, more creativity within ourselves, we naturally become agents of positive change in the world. Like our very presence becomes a source of healing and
I
inspiration.
love that image of our presence as a source of healing.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put that into practice? It's easy to get kind of, caught up in our own personal growth and forget about the bigger picture.
Right. And that's where the importance of ethical living comes in. Burbee encourages us to see our actions, even the small ones, as expressions of our soul's deepest values.
So it's not just about meditating on compassion. It's about actually embodying compassion in our daily lives.
Exactly. And he suggests that this embodiment doesn't have to be, this big dramatic thing. It can be as simple as offering a kind word to someone or volunteering our time to a cause we care about or making more conscious choices about, how we consume and interact with the world around us.
Yeah, those small acts can really make a difference. But I'm curious, in the context of Burbea's teachings, what does it actually mean to create a better world? Are we talking about achieving some kind of utopian ideal, or is it something more nuanced than that?
He was a bit wary of utopian visions, recognizing that, they can lead to these rigid ideologies, these attempts to impose a specific vision on others. Instead, he saw it as an ongoing exploration, a kind of collaborative dance between individual and collective aspirations.
So it's less about achieving this fixed outcome and more about fostering a culture of creativity, compassion, understanding.
Precisely. And he suggests that this culture can only really emerge if we're willing to, engage in this open-hearted dialogue, to
Yeah.
really listen to different perspectives
Yeah.
and embrace the complexities and challenges of living in a world of interconnectedness.
This reminds me of something we touched on earlier, the importance of not getting too attached to these fixed frameworks or beliefs. It seems like that applies not just to our personal growth, but also to our vision of what a better world could look like.
Absolutely. He challenges us to hold our visions lightly, to be willing to adapt, evolve as new insights and challenges emerge. And he reminds us that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
So it's about embracing the unknown, the mystery of what's possible.
Exactly. And trusting that even amidst uncertainty, there's this deeper intelligence at work, guiding us towards a more just and compassionate future.
It's a beautiful thought. It's hopeful. But it also kind of makes me wonder, what role does spirituality play in all of this? Is Burbea saying that we all need to become Buddhists or follow some specific path to create a better world?
Not at all. While his teachings are rooted in Buddhist thought, he was incredibly open to wisdom from all sorts of traditions and perspectives. He saw spirituality as this universal human capacity, a longing for meaning, connection, transcendence that can be expressed in many ways.
So it's about tapping into that universal longing, regardless of our, religious beliefs or lack thereof.
Exactly. And he suggests that this longing can be a really powerful force for positive change. It can inspire us to act with greater compassion, courage, and creativity.
It sounds like Burbea's vision of a better world isn't so much about imposing any particular ideology. It's more about awakening to this potential for goodness that already exists within each of us.
Yeah, and to the interconnectedness that binds us together as humans. It's a vision that calls for both individual transformation and collective action. A vision that really invites us to step into our full potential as agents of healing and change.
And I think our listeners will really appreciate that. As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Rob Burbea, what's one key takeaway that you hope they'll walk away with?
I think just remembering that soul making isn't passive. It requires courage, commitment, a willingness to really engage with the complexities of of life, both internal and external. But it's also a profoundly joyful and liberating journey, one that leads us toward a more vibrant, more meaningful experience of life itself.
It's a journey of discovering who we are and what we're here to offer the world. And maybe in the process, we'll discover that the world we long for is already taking shape within us.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you. And to our listeners, we invite you to continue the exploration, to discover your own unique path, and to contribute your own gifts to creating a more compassionate and just world. Thanks for joining us.